Mike Wagenheim, who is in the Blue and White Party headquarters there in Tel Aviv. Mike, we just learned that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, he canceled some election event that he was supposed to attend in the city of Ashdod in southern Israel. And this is in order to convene a special emergency meeting of the Likud activists. Do you think it's a good sign for the Blue and White Party? Does it mean that Netanyahu is under stress?
No, it means absolutely nothing, Tal, other than standard operating procedure for Benjamin Netanyahu. He did nearly the same thing in 2015. This is the strategy of Benjamin Netanyahu, the strategy of the Likud party to poke fear, basically, in the minds of their potential supporters. Netanyahu did this in the last election. He's done it when he's had to come from behind before, and this is just another method to make it look like the Likud, whether they are or not, are indeed trailing. He brought on a pollster with him yesterday who said that the pollster found that 9% of Likud voters were going to stay home. Netanyahu tried to use this as ammunition to say, see, the Likud voters, you have to pick up the pace here. This pollster next to me is showing that you have to stay home. That pollster, by the way, an American pollster, has been discredited a number of times, but that's beside the point. Listen, this isn't really a sign of anything. It's not a sign that Gantz is ahead. It's not a sign that Netanyahu is too far behind the catch-up. It's a sign that Netanyahu is employing the strategy that he's employed time and time again, and with much success, by the way, time and time again. So why stray from it at this point?
Mike, I want to ask about Blue and White's, their leaders' recent comments, both Benny Gantz and Yair Lapid, saying, we believe that we're going to have at least a 4-seat edge over Netanyahu, maybe even more, 5 or 6 seats. And if we do, we'll be able to form the next government. That will be our job because we'll have such a clear mandate. What is the argument or the belief among Blue and White supporters, even if they beat Netanyahu by 4 seats, but they have no path at all to a majority coalition? There's no clear path for them to 61 seats. Why should they get the first crack at getting the government together?
That's a question for President Reuven Rivlin that he'll have to make. In fact, if Blue and White is ahead by 3 or 4 seats, it may be too much for Rivlin to handle at that point, and he may see it as the will of the voters to give Blue and White the first crack at forming a coalition. But it has been a fear of supporters of Benny Gantz and Yair Lapid that even if they were to go out and vote for Blue and White on election day, that in fact Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu would remain Prime Minister anyway. We see it in the polling. Blue and White, for the most part, 9 out of 10 polls have shown them ahead of the Likud party. But when you ask people who they believe, not who they think should be, but who they believe will be the next prime minister, the majority give it to Benjamin Netanyahu. So that is indeed the consensus thinking, is that Blue and White is going to win here tonight. But come a month from now, Benjamin Netanyahu will remain prime minister. Now, does that drive anybody away from voting for Blue and White, thinking that they're just wasting their time and energy? I'm not so sure. The anti-Netanyahu crowd here in Israel is vehemently, it seems, anti-Netanyahu and are looking desperately for change. And so I think that will drive, if anything, them to vote for Blue and White, even if they think in the back of their minds that, you know what, it's all for naught anyway, that Netanyahu will indeed remain prime minister.
Mike, do you have any idea where is Benny Gantz right now? What's his schedule for this very beautiful sunny election day?
He's making the rounds as well. In fact, he had to take somewhat of a detour. Gantz was actually pulled over on the side of the road to help a motorist who had been involved in an accident, a motorcycle rider. And Gantz waited there until emergency crews arrived. How much that affected his schedule, we're not exactly sure. We don't expect Gantz, along with Lapid and the other big 2 out of the big 4, former Defense Minister Moshe Alon and former IDF Chief of Staff Gabi Ashkenazi, to arrive here until very late tonight, possibly around midnight or so. But Gantz is making the rounds in territories that he feels he can really push out the vote. He's using, by the way, the operations staff of Yair Lapid. Remember, Gantz is a novice politician. He just jumped into politics a couple of months ago. He really doesn't have an operational base with which to work with, though it is Yair Lapid and his base that he's built up for 3 years now, or for 3 Knesset elections now, really trying to drive the election strategy here today, going door to door, trying to pound the pavement, making sure that anybody who might have had an inclination of voting for blue and white, who may still be sitting on the fence, that they get them to the polls today.
All right, Mike, live for us at Blue and White headquarters. Thank you so much for that live update. Being wise, let's turn now to our diplomatic correspondent, Mike Wagenheim. That was brilliant. Mike Wagenheim live for us at the Blue and White Party headquarters, where the turnout, the atmosphere is starting to get riled up ahead of the exit polls later tonight. Mike, I want to ask about the comments recently from Benny Gantz and Yair Lapid. They said to their voters, we are so close to the finish line. We are confident that if we get 1 or 2 more seats from the undecided voters, if we can swing 1 or 2 more seats, we will have a big enough gap to be tasked with forming the next government. Do blue and white voters, do they believe that they have crossed that finish line? Have they convinced the last minute undecided voters?
Jeff, I don't think we're going to know the answer to that right now. It's certainly not, but hopefully in a few hours we will. But that's been the difference, I think, between Gantz and Lapid's strategy as opposed to everybody else. There are parties from across the political spectrum right now who are calling collapse, saying our party's going to be wiped out if our supporters don't get to the polls. It's a scare tactic coming from many parties across the political spectrum right now, right and left. Gantz and Lapid are basically saying we're winning, but it's not enough. We need to win by more. We need to get that mandate from President Reuven Rivlin to get the first crack at forming the next government. And saying we're that close, I think Yair Lapid said we're a couple of yards away, a couple of meters away, but we need to get over that finish line. So that's been the difference in the strategy between blue and white, Gantz and Lapid, and everybody else today. Everybody else saying we're on the verge of collapse. Gantz and Lapid said we're winning, but we need a few more votes to make sure we get that first mandate.
Mike Wagenheim, thank you for this report. We'll check in with you a bit later in our broadcast. So let's go to Mike Wagenheim in the headquarters of the Blue and White Party in Tel Aviv. He probably has what to say. Mike Wagenheim, it seems pretty quiet around you right now still. Are people, activists, starting to gear up for the money time?
It's really campaign staff more here than anything. This hall isn't built to really hold a lot of activists and supporters. Much of it is taken up by the huge amount of media that is here tonight in the large stage that is behind me. Most of the kibbutzing and congratulating will be going on outside of the event hall in a little gathering area out here. So it's mainly campaign staff, operatives, media security that are here right now just trying to prepare the scene for either a celebration, a consolation. We don't really know what's going on right now. Whatever happens at 10 o'clock or possibly as late as midnight when we expect the big four of the party to make their way in, that's what everybody's preparing for at the moment here, and the reaction to whatever they have to say
Mike,
when they finally make their way here.
Mike, in just about 2 hours, we're going to get the first exit polls, and we'll get the first sense of whether or not Benny Gantz ran a disastrous campaign, a terrible campaign, or was secretly it was a brilliant campaign. One way or the other, it's clear that Gantz's strategy and his methodology on the campaign trail was certainly unique.
The main message behind Benny Gantz's strategy was, thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. You've done some good things. You've outlasted your service to the country. You've reached your expiration date, and it's time for the country to go in a different direction. That was the core message. Now, at times, it kind of changed direction. It shifted a little bit. It got more focused on this or that, given the polling at any given time. We saw in the home stretch, Gantz and his campaign try to start taking away some votes from the left center, from Labor, from Meretz, to try to make their point, just as Benjamin Netanyahu did on the right, that the big thing is making sure that the party with the most seats beats the other party with the second most seats by so much that it leaves President Reuven Rivlin with no choice but to give that largest party the mandate to build the next government. So it wasn't so much at the end Gantz saying it's time for a change, because I think most people had made up their minds if they were going to vote for somebody other than Netanyahu. They said, well, it's time for change. It's time to vote for somebody else. The message in the final 24, 48, 72 hours for the Gantz-Lapid campaign was, we not only need votes from the anti-Bibi people who have soured on Benjamin Netanyahu, we need the votes from Labor, from Meretz, from people who would ordinarily vote to the left of a party like Blue and White. Give those votes to Blue and White, or else it's all for naught. There's no chance of forming an anti-Netanyahu government.
Mike Wagenheim in Tel Aviv, thank you.
I'm Kalev Ben David.
And I'm Nurit Ben. You're watching I-24 News with extended live coverage as Israel votes in a high-stakes election being watched around the world. Polls close in exactly 2 hours from now. We'll be with you throughout it all. Our correspondents across the country, analysts from across the political spectrum, and an exclusive I-24 News election poll right here at exactly 10 p.m. local time, 3 p.m. Eastern.
And this campaign season has been dramatic, to say the least. New partnerships coming together, old ones falling apart, and the Prime Minister running for a record 4th consecutive term, all this while under threat of indictment. Benjamin Netanyahu's biggest challenger, ex-military chief Benny Gantz and his new Blue and White Party.
And one of them will then face the tough task of building Israel's next coalition government. Our diplomatic correspondent Mike Wagenheim starts off our coverage at the Blue and White Party headquarters in Tel Aviv. Mike, it seems like every party, no matter where they fall in the political spectrum, feeling the heat, a little bit stressed, just 2 hours before polls close.
Some are actually feeling the heat. Some just say they're feeling the heat. Nurit, there are parties from left to right that are looking at turnout right now and with their own internal polling, whether it's actually real or fabricated, saying we're dying here, basically. If we don't get our supporters to come out and vote for us, we're not going to qualify for the next parliament. Our party's going to be wiped off the face of Israeli politics. That's the rallying cry that those parties are hoping for, energizes their base to actually get out and vote. And then the lone exception to that, somewhat, is the Blue and White Party. They're not panicking per se, as some of the other parties are publicly, but at least saying we're not there yet. We're winning, we feel good, but we're not where we need to be in order to win the election. So Benny Gantz, together with his number 2, Yair Lapid, the message today for the most part has been, well, we can beat Benjamin Netanyahu, but we're still a few meters away. We need those votes coming from those on the fence, coming from those that might have otherwise sat out, coming from those that might have voted to the left of Blue and White, to basically put Blue and White over the top and make sure that they not only beat the Likud party, but have a few more seats than Likud in order to make sure that President Reuven Rivlin then feels his own heat to give Blue and White the first mandate to form the next government rather than Benjamin Netanyahu's Likud party.
Thank you, Mike.
Blue and White Party headquarters. And Mike, we've been seeing some of the images of celebrations. Clearly, a lot of people are happy there, but it's still also a very long and uncertain road ahead.
Yeah, we got a long night ahead of us, but the mood here at Blue and White after seeing the initial exit polls is fairly celebratory at this point. We're joined by a member of the Israeli parliament with the Yesh Atid party, now with the Blue and White ticket, Karine El-Ahrar. First off, what's your mood at this point in time?
Well, basically we won. Netanyahu was expecting 40 seats. We didn't. The people in Israel have said his mind. They want a change. As we speak, our leaders are speaking with other parties. We're going to form the next coalition. Very simple as that.
One poll has you ahead by 4 seats, others just by a slim margin. If it comes down to just 1 or 2 seats that Blue and White is ahead by, do you fear the president, Reuven Rivlin, will give the mandate anyway to Prime Minister Netanyahu because he has the support of more parties overall?
What I feel is that over 1 billion people in Israel voted for Blue and White. They want a change. We're going to give it to them.
What kind of change will come with Prime Minister Gantz and eventually Prime Minister Lapid?
First, we have a vision, and then we have to change the priority. We have to see the interest of the people by health, social care, traffic, everything that the government didn't do for the citizens in Israel. We have to do it. It's our obligation.
Prime Minister Gantz, he's got to make a lot of decisions coming up here in order to form his coalition. There's a lot of politicking involved. He's not really, although he's sort of becoming one, not really yet a politician. He's new to this game. These are very delicate negotiations, a lot of give and take. Do you feel confident in him that he'll be able to get the job done?
Definitely. Gantz is a leader, and that's what Israel really needs. And he will get all the help we need with politics. We have a lot of politicians in the party. We know how to do it. We just need the mandate, and we got it.
All right, we want to thank you for joining us. It's going to be a long night for everybody.
It is. Thank you.
Karina Alar from the Blue and White Ticket joining us here live from Blue and White headquarters.
Well, they're celebrating at Blue and White headquarters.
Michelle, everybody claiming victory out here. Everybody claiming victory. Benny Gantz, Benjamin Netanyahu, all the parties, all saying they're going to form the next coalition. But really, as of now, there's so much left to be determined. The votes are in the process of being counted. Blue and White had an early advantage. It's now swung to Likud, but they're going to be counting for hours now before we find out who the real winner is, if there even is a clear winner tonight. But both leaders, Gantz and Netanyahu, trying to get ahead of the curve, trying to present themselves as a clear-cut winner tonight, trying to force President Reuven Rivlin's hands. It will be Rivlin who will decide who will get the first mandate to form the government. Blue and White saying they're leading Likud, and therefore the biggest party should get the advantage. Netanyahu, even if his Likud party winds up trailing, will certainly say that he has the most amount of parties behind him, and therefore he should get the first crack at it. So even after all the votes are counted, we still might not have a clear winner coming out of tonight.
Right. And Mike, we heard from a very confident Benny Gantz earlier saying that a great light has illuminated Israel, saying that at least 1 million people have voted for this new party, the Blue and White Party, which has been so recently formed and yet is now such a decisive player, either way you look at it, in the next Israeli Knesset. And he thanked Prime Minister Netanyahu for his service, saying, you've had a good run. It's time to go. And as you mentioned, called on the Israeli president to give him the mandate to start forming the coalition. Let's hear a little bit from what Gantz had to say earlier.
They said I wouldn't go into politics, and I did. They said we wouldn't be able to combine forces, yet we did. They said we wouldn't win, yet we did. We won.
So, Mike, when does this confidence translate into real results? What is the sentiment in terms of the real votes that are starting to trickle in?
It's still way too early to tell. Everybody wishes they knew the answer right now, but the fact is that they don't. Benny Gantz, though, 1 million votes, as you mentioned, a party that came out of nowhere, a leader in Benny Gantz. It really came out of nowhere, unknown to the political realm until a few months ago. Obviously made his name in the military, but barely spoke a word, even as a politician, for the first few months of the campaign. Certainly an impressive result for Blue and White tonight. They had the operational background of Yair Lapid, the former finance minister, and his Yesh Atid party. This is now their third election, so Gantz was the front man, but it was Lapid's operation running behind the scenes that really got out the votes. The campaign in the final few days here, challenging other parties on the left and drawing their votes as well. Again, we're hours away from finding out what these initial numbers really mean, but certainly, no matter what happens tonight, Benny Gantz and the operation he was able to lead over the last 3 months, certainly an impressive feat.
And Mike, you mentioned Yair Lapid, and the Blue and White Party does have a rotation agreement that Benny Gantz, should he win, would serve as prime minister for the first 2.5 years, that would then rotate to Yair Lapid. And he is seen as a less popular figure than Benny Gantz, at least amongst the sentiment that we got from some of the voters. So much so that Prime Minister Netanyahu was flipping the names on the ticket when he started to mention them, saying Yair Lapid and Benny Gantz. Have we heard much from Lapid so far tonight?
No, Yair Lapid kind of slipped into the background and didn't say much up on stage. He had put out some videos earlier on in the day, but they were mainly a get out the vote type of message. And he is playing second fiddle tonight to Benny Gantz. And we saw some polls earlier on in the week that actually showed that if the rotation agreement was dropped, that in fact Blue and White would do even better. And some were imploring Lapid to concede that rotation agreement and give it to Gantz the entire way. He refused to do so, but we see the result tonight. Yair Lapid, again, just playing second fiddle, letting Gantz have the spotlight tonight, and that appears to be the best thing. And as you mentioned, the strategy for Benjamin Netanyahu, paint Gantz or rather paint Lapid as a front man rather than Gantz, because Gantz has just more popularity right now than Yair Lapid.
All right, Mike Wagenheim, Thank you so much, and we will continue to check in with you.
Let's go to our Tel Aviv bureau there, where our I-24 News diplomatic correspondent Mike Wagenheim has the latest on these new and narrower election results. Mike, thanks for being here.
Of course, Derek.
So what do you make of this tightening race? Yeah.
Yeah, we expected a tight race to start tonight, and the original exit polls that came out showed the blue and white party either with a very large lead. That exit poll was later amended by one of the major Israeli networks. The other two major networks here showing a slimmer lead for blue and white, but the Likud party has led in the actual vote count for much of the night. There are a couple of things to watch for here. Keep in mind, Likud doesn't have to win outright to form the next government. The blue and white ticket led by former IDF Chief of Staff Benny Gantz may come out on top, but they have a much, much narrower path to forming a governing coalition of 61 seats. So while they may win by a seat or two, it certainly doesn't guarantee or come anything close to guaranteeing that Benny Gantz would be the next prime minister anyway. The second thought is that right now, six parties are between 3 and 4% of the vote. Why does that matter? Well, you need at least 3.25% of the vote to qualify for the Knesset. 3.25% of the vote equals 4 seats. If you drop below 3.25%, you get nothing, and you're completely out. Your votes go right in the garbage. There are 6 parties, 3 on each side of the blocks, right there near the threshold. That could have a huge impact. Thousands of votes could make the difference in whether one of these two leaders tonight, Gantz or Netanyahu, could form the next coalition. So it's certainly something to keep our eye on. By the way, both Arab tickets that are running in this year's election are within that margin right now, between 3 and 4%. It's conceivable there will be no Arab party representation in the next parliament, as Arab turnout was extremely low here tonight in Israel.
And Mike, as I understand it, though, it's expected that Israeli President Reuven Rivlin will follow the will of the people here and decide which candidate will get to form that coalition government. We'll go with the clear winner, right?
If there is a clear winner, that's always been the issue. President Reuven, there's no really clearly defined rule for the president as to who he selects to form the government. One person can say, well, it should be the biggest party, which could turn out to be blue and white, although Likud leads right now. But for the sake of argument, let's say it's blue and white. They're the biggest party. Why not? Well, Benjamin Netanyahu can come back and say, I have the support of more individual parties than Benny Gantz does. Therefore, I can get to 61 more quickly and more efficiently. I should form the next government. That's what this race may come down to, but if the polling holds right now, the voting count holds, Likud will win outright anyway, won't make a lick of difference. President Reuven Rivlin will hand it back to Prime Minister Netanyahu.
I-24's Mike Wagenheim with the election update. Mike, thanks.
Netanyahu's Likud party leads with 37 seats in the Knesset, one more than centrist rival Blue and White and Benny Gantz. According to Blue and White leaders, Gantz and Yair Lapid, an alliance between the two, now out of the question. And I-24 News diplomatic correspondent Mike Wagenheim joining us from Tel Aviv with more on the results and the latest that we're hearing right now. And what has the reaction been since we have seen the poll numbers shift over the past few hours?
First off, just an update. The new numbers were just released a moment ago. They're now up to 90% of votes counted. Still the same margin. Likud 37, Blue and White 36. But Benjamin Netanyahu's bloc, his right-wing and religious bloc, is strengthening. They're up to a projected 68 seats, well above the 61 needed to form a coalition. It does appear that Benjamin Netanyahu is well on his way to another term as prime minister, unless there is some dramatic changes coming in those final 10% of votes to be counted. Here's what we're learning. Number one, the Israeli left was crushed in this election tonight. We see it on the face of Labor leader Avi Gabay during his post-election press conference, a very somber mood. He, together with the Meretz Party and the Arab parties, are only projected right now to obtain, let's see here, 16 seats out of 120. This is the Israeli left that dominated the state for much of his existence up until about the last 30 years. Now it's been virtually wiped off the political map. So that's one takeaway from today. The other, Yisrael Beitenu and the Shas Party, two of the surprises of the election, both were on the cusp of not making it. Looked like both were going to be below the mandatory threshold, number of votes to be able to enter the next parliament. Shas shocked everybody tonight. It looks like they're on the way to 8 seats, not to 0, but 8. Yisrael Beitenu projected to get 6 seats right now. So the reaction certainly from the right-wing religious bloc, one of "I told you so." They saying that we knew it was coming all along. The polls were wrong. The media was wrong. They're all feeding you a story. And from the center left, they can still, at least for Benny Gantz's party, claim victory in some way, even though it certainly looks like Benny Gantz will not be the next prime minister. A movement that really took hold in a very short amount of time. Gantz entered politics just a couple of months ago, an unknown in the political world, barely said anything for the first month and a half of his candidacy, and here he comes, and looks like he's going to be just about 1 seat short of tying the greatest political operative in Israeli history in Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. So there does appear to be some hope for the anti-Netanyahu crowd. It's just not tonight.
All right, Mike, thanks a lot.
They said we wouldn't win, yet we did. We won.
All right, I-24 News correspondent Mike Wagenheim was live earlier at the Blue and White Party headquarters in Tel Aviv. He is now joining us from the I-24 News studios in Tel Aviv. And Mike, it seems like it was a premature declaration of victory from Benny Gantz there as we're getting the results coming in.
Yeah, these exit polls here in Israel infamously can be unreliable. And even the exit poll which showed that Gantz was ahead was amended just a couple of hours later. The Israeli television channel that issued that poll basically said, oops, we got that one wrong, and issued an amended final exit poll number. So Gantz jumped the gun. I think it was a strategic move on his part. It was the one time that he really could grab the momentum and say, okay, this is the party that President Reuven Rivlin needs to go with. If he waited longer and mixed messages started coming in, it makes it more difficult to look like the winner, which is part of the battle to begin with. Not even if you have the best numbers, not even if you surpassed expectations, you just got to look like the winner sometimes here in Israel, and people will think that you're the winner, or at least give you an opportunity to act like a winner. So the Gantz jumped on that opportunity when that early poll was released. Obviously, it was premature, and the tide turned quickly and turned dramatically, and Benjamin Netanyahu, the prime minister, well on his way to another term in office.
And Mike, again, the threshold to make it into the Knesset, the 21st Knesset of the State of Israel, was raised this year to 3.25%. And we're seeing a number of parties failing to make that threshold, or just on the bubble in terms of making the threshold. Give us a breakdown of those parties like Zehut, which we anticipated would qualify, that right now are looking like they're not going to make it at all.
Yeah, the mandatory minimum is 3.25% of the vote, and we already have 39 parties running in the Israeli parliament. That minimum threshold was put in place so that you weren't getting a bunch of parties with 1 seat and making it a completely chaotic situation, even more so than it is right now in the Israeli parliament. So that minimum threshold has been there for a while. The current threshold is 3.25%, which is a minimum of 4 seats. You mentioned Zehut. They were the upstart of this election, or at least appeared to be. Ex-Likud member of parliament Moshe Feiglin running a part right-wing, part left-wing campaign, depending on the particular issue, really seemed to capture the imagination, especially with platform items like cannabis legalization, but flopped, it would appear, on election day. Maybe not helped out by a surprise interview he had with a comedian this past week in the home stretch of the campaign, in which he participated in some bizarre activity like sipping whiskey and tickling feet. certainly I don't think it helped him down the stretch. The New Right Party, led by Education Minister Naftali Bennett and Justice Minister Ayelet Shaked, looks like they are on the way out. The New Right Party of Bennett and Shaked breaking away from the religious Zionist Jewish Home Party. They took a chance, formed their own party, hoping to get a broader base of voters, some non-religious voters. It was a bold step. Doesn't look like it's worked out, and the New Right likely is going to be out of the next parliament, and two of the biggest names in Bennett and Shaked are going to be looking for new work.
And Mike, one of the concerns was that Arab Israelis would boycott this vote. There was concern of low voter turnout for the Arab Israeli parties. Tell us the latest there.
We're going by the official numbers here, and the official numbers have the Hadash and Ta'al ticket getting into the parliament with 90% of the vote counted. It looks like they'll have 5 seats. Again, there are votes still to be counted, but the more hardline Balad Ra'am ticket appears like they won't qualify for parliament. Keep in mind the Joint Arab List, the combination of the 4 major Arab parties in Israel, had 13 seats in the last Knesset. They were the 3rd largest party. They're now down, and they split into 2 tickets for this race. They're now down to what it would appear to be just 5 seats. Now, we expected, according to all the surveys, according to all the polling and all the anecdotal evidence, that the Arab turnout was going to be very low this year based on a number of different factors. There was a scandal today in which the Likud party was caught with hidden cameras in many of the Arab polling stations. The Likud party didn't deny it. Benjamin Netanyahu came right out and said, yeah, it was us. We want to make sure there was no funny business, double voting and things of that nature going on in the Arab polling stations. Some analysts say it depressed Arab turnout even further, seen as an intimidation tactic of sorts. We'll never truly know if it depressed voting even more, but Arab turnout again was expected to be lower than normal today anyway.
And Mike, this referendum this vote was seen as a referendum on Prime Minister Netanyahu. It does look like he's set for a record 5th term. Very quickly, for our viewers who are not familiar with the process, break it down for us. What happens next in terms of coalition building, in terms of President Rivlin giving him potentially the mandate to go ahead and try and build that coalition government? Break that down for us, please.
The president has the option of who he wants to select to try to form the next government and get to a majority of 61 out of 120 seats in the Israeli parliament. Usually it's the biggest party that gets the first crack at it, but this time around we might have a situation in which the blue and white might eke out a victory over the Likud party. However, that narrow victory probably won't be enough to get Benny Gantz the first crack at it. It looked like he really needed a big victory because Benjamin Netanyahu has more parties that will recommend him as prime minister. There is no set terms for the president to make his selection. There's no set criteria, so he has a little bit of leverage. He could go with the biggest party. He could go with the candidate that has the most recommendations. But if it's close, keep in mind, Rivlin was a member of Likud. He's more apt to give it to, even though he's a rival of Benjamin Netanyahu now, more apt to give it to Netanyahu if it is close. Gantz really needed a big victory tonight.
Right. We're hearing that the Israeli Central Elections Committee is confirming that 28,000 invalid ballots were cast in this election. Let's take you now to Rosh Ha'ayin. Our diplomatic correspondent Mike Wagenheim is at the home of co-leader of the Blue and White Party, Benny Gantz. Breaking news, we're just hearing now about these invalid ballots that were cast. Tell us, Mike, what does this all mean?
28,000 invalid ballots reported by the Central Elections Committee. Benita, those ballots disqualified for anything like a defaced ballot, scribbling on the ballot, a tear of some kind. The Central Elections Committee was clear that if they thought that there was some intentional vandalism of the ballots being perpetrated in order to disqualify a party's ballots altogether at a particular polling station, that they would let it slide, but they still found about 28,000 ballots to disqualify. What does it mean? It's worth less than one Knesset seat and spread out likely over a number of parties, will not have a major impact on anything going on in the election. As you mentioned, Benny Gantz's Blue and White Party falling to Likud last night. We're still waiting for the final few percentages of ballots to be counted from diplomats around the world and soldiers, IDF soldiers that cast their ballot at polling stations here in Israel. But it certainly seems as if Benjamin Netanyahu is well on his way to forming the next coalition with some breathing room. And in fact, the new Right Party, that brand new party led by Education Minister Naftali Bennett and Justice Minister Ayelet Shaked, right now below the minimum threshold needed to enter the next parliament, but they're only about 1,500, 1,600 votes short. They believe that they will get the support of Israel's military, the soldiers. They believe that those votes will come through for them from the IDF, and they, in fact, will also qualify for the next parliament. We'll have to wait for those votes to be counted. Hopefully, we'll have a better idea in the next few hours.
Now, Mike, Benny Gantz releasing a statement this morning saying, in his words, although the skies are dark, nothing is final, as there may be electoral movements and we may be able to develop political moves of one kind or another. What exactly does this mean?
The faintest idea, Benita. There is no path right now for Benny Gantz. For some reason, Netanyahu's natural allies would have to suddenly turn on him. Gantz just doesn't have the numbers. Labor did not come through last night. Meretz really didn't come through last night. His path to 61 seats is darn near impossible. In fact, the Arab parties were included in the bloc totals, but the Arab parties have never joined a government, and one of those Arab tickets may not make the threshold either as we wait for the final numbers to come in. It's wishful thinking, I think, on the part of Benny Gantz and company to think they can form a government at this point.
Diplomatic correspondent Mike Wagenheim updating us live from Rosh Hashanah. Thank you so much for that update.
In one moment, Zohar, because we have just our correspondent just outside Benny Gantz's home. We'll continue the analysis in the studio for a second. Mike Wagenheim, we're outside Benny Gantz's home. The opposition not yet conceding defeat. What are they hoping for? Some sort of miracle to come out of the final 1% of the votes to be counted? Why the hesitation?
Good question right now. It seems like some false hope being given by Benny Gantz, and especially after the victory speech yesterday, only to find out that those exit polls were incorrect. I'm not quite sure what the Gantz strategy is here. It seems as if Netanyahu has a clear path to a majority government and even has a little bit of cushion in doing so. So whatever political maneuvers Gantz has in mind, he's keeping to himself right now and may only be in his own mind right now. The math just isn't there for Benny Gantz. He's keeping hope alive for some reason, maybe hoping that the coalition partners of Netanyahu ask for too much, that somehow something breaks down along the way. But again, just realistically, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is going to remain Prime Minister unless something completely unexpected and dramatic breaks down with the coalition negotiations.
Mike, what else are we hearing from representatives of Blue and White? Let's remind viewers this is an alliance of three separate parties. Israel Resilience, Yesh Atid, Telem, they might not see eye to eye strategically now.
I'm not sure if they saw really eye-to-eye strategically to begin with. There's a lot of variations in their political platforms and what they've said throughout the campaign between Benny Gantz, the leader of Israel Resilience, Yair Lapid, the leader of Yesh Atid, and Moshe Ya'alon, who leads the Telem party. They banded together on this ticket because they thought, and they were correct, that it would benefit them politically, that they would garner more seats together than separately, but very much different ideals espoused by those three particular leaders, and there are questions for weeks now as to whether they would remain together. I particularly believe that they will, because it's the will of the voters that they voted this party in together, and to separate now would go against the will of the voters, and Benny Gantz and Yair Lapid have been talking about the will of the voters for weeks now. I don't think 2 years from now, 3 years from now, that these factions will remain together, but for the immediate future, I believe they'll enter the Knesset together and at least try to make it work as long as they can.
And finally, Mike, we just saw Benny Gantz approaching his car. Do we have any indication where he's going?
Going to work, apparently, trying to figure out what the next step is here and meet with other members, potential members of his coalition. Certainly will try to bring right-wing parties into the fold. But again, the chances of that are infinitesimal that he'll be able to make that happen at this point. But he's going to give it his best shot. What else is there to do on a beautiful day like today except try to become the next prime minister?
Okay, Mike Wagenheim, try to get some rest before we come back to you. You've been awake since yesterday morning.
We're going to stop you right there because I want to take you now to Rosh Ha'ayin. That's where our diplomatic correspondent Mike Wagenheim is. He's at the home of the co-leader of the Blue and White Party, Benny Gantz. Good morning to you, Mike. A long night for you as well, and a dramatic night for Israeli voters, certainly for politicians as well. Benny Gantz delivering a victory speech last night, but as we're saying in studio this morning, it's a different story. He may have been speaking too soon, it seems.
It seems the speech indeed was premature. Gantz trying to take advantage of an early exit poll that showed him up 4 seats on Benjamin Netanyahu's Likud party. That exit poll, obviously we know now, inaccurate, as Israeli exit polls are infamously known to be. That exit poll was later amended to show that, in fact, Benjamin Netanyahu was projected to have a lead at the end of the vote counting. And as we get toward these final 2 or 3 percentages of votes now, the home stretch of the vote counting, all that's left are diplomats and soldiers' votes. And it looks like that the Likud will either eke out a straight victory over Blue and White, or there'll be a draw. Either way, Benjamin Netanyahu expected to be given the mandate to form a new government by President Reuven Rivlin, because he certainly has an easier path to forming a coalition than Benny Gantz does.
Now, Mike, also a strong showing from the ultra-Orthodox parties of Shas and United Torah Judaism, each taking 8 seats at the moment. Take us through what this means for Benjamin Netanyahu.
Well, you know, it gives him an easier path to forming a government, certainly, as the ultra-Orthodox parties, the Haredi parties, are reliable partners for him. They seem to work well together. However, they also tend to hold the prime minister hostage once a government is formed on issues of religious observance, of issues of the IDF draft bill, the bill to draft more of the Haredim into the Israeli army, which has killed 2 governments thus far because the ultra-Orthodox refused to concede on that particular measure. They'll have to redraft that bill again. So it's easy to form a government with them. It's harder to keep a government with them. That's a trade-off for the prime minister coming up.
Now, Mike, the final voter turnout was 67.9%. Now, that's a drop of almost 4% from 2015. Is this a surprising turnout? Why would this have happened?
It's not surprising or unsurprising. It's pretty much the average for Israeli elections. As you look over the course of history, there were a few surprises, most notably among them. The Arab turnout was appears to be historically low. We got kind of the writing on the wall in the week or 2 leading up to the elections, as surveys and polls started being released, and even anecdotal evidence from the Arab communities that they just didn't feel like, A, their particular parties were fighting for them and making change for them in their communities, and B, that even if they had power within the Israeli parliament from their respective parties, that it was really going to make any difference in the end. The Arab parties have never sat with a government in Israel's history. So there was a little bit of disillusionment within the Arab community, and the expected turnout, the low turnout that we've been hearing about over the last couple of weeks came to fruition last night, and it cost the Arabs much representation within the parliament. They had 13 seats in the last Knesset between their 4 parties, which had joined together before the last election. This time they run on 2 separate tickets. It looks like at most they'll have 9 seats. They could wind up with only 5, depending on how these final numbers come out, because one of those tickets is on the threshold right now of either getting in or being left out.
Now, Mike, just briefly, we're sitting at 97% of the votes in. When will there be a final outcome for the people in Israel?
According to the Central Elections Committee, the final numbers should be coming in at about noon today. Now, they may have cushioned that a bit just so people wouldn't be expecting an early final count. Keep in mind, there are some technical issues still to go through, and also the soldier and diplomat votes can take a little while as well due to some technical rules behind that. But it won't be that much longer. We should have a final count in just a few hours or so. We'll know if those remaining parties on the threshold got in or will be left out of the next Knesset.
Thank you so much, diplomatic correspondent Mike Wagenheim, updating us live from Rosh Ha'ayin.
and the Arab parties on 10. Let's go live now to our correspondent Mike Wagenheim, who is in Rosh Ain, outside the home of the man who until yesterday was a prime ministerial contender, Benny Gantz. Mike, the results are quite clear. The right won a resounding victory, and yet Blue and White is not conceding defeat.
You know, not quite yet, but the scene out here pretty much sums it up. Right in front of Benny Gantz's house, an empty street now. Most of the campaign signs have already come down, and the only one that's still holding out hope, well, he ain't exactly all that excited either to be out here today for Benny Gantz. The Kahol Levan party coming up short yesterday, not only head-to-head with Likud, although the final numbers have yet to come out, but obviously now it's quite clear that Benjamin Netanyahu is going to remain prime minister, a much clearer path in order to form a majority government, to get to those 61 seats, and he'll probably even have a cushion to do so and be able to get a little bit more of what he wants and be able to give up a little bit less. He can play a little bit more with his coalition partners. It looks like he'll have about 65 seats, 4 more than the majority necessary. Benny Gantz still says he's holding out hope, discussing unspecified political maneuvers, which may enable him to be able to become prime minister. What those maneuvers are very unclear at this point. It doesn't look like any which way you turn it, he will be able to become the next prime minister of the state of Israel.
Mike, are we hearing any indications about what Blue and White might do now? They've been very clear, promising they won't sit with Benjamin Netanyahu. But again, if they haven't conceded defeat, we haven't heard a clear statement that they won't sit with him yet this morning.
Benjamin Netanyahu right now doesn't need to sit with Benny Gantz, and that's really Gantz's biggest problem at this point. The only thing that would have really forced them together if Netanyahu was unable to form a right-wing government on his own. But unless there's a complete breakdown, I mean, all the natural partners are there for Benjamin Netanyahu. The ultra-Orthodox, the Haredi parties, natural partners with him. Yisrael Beitenu, although he had a falling out with Defense Minister at that time, Avigdor Lieberman. Lieberman's Yisrael Beitenu party, a right-wing party, certainly a favorable party for which Netanyahu to team up with again. You have other parties in there. If New Right passes the threshold, another reliable right-wing partner. So it's in order for Netanyahu, and Benjamin Netanyahu rarely screws up things of this magnitude. He'll find a way to get it done without having to pull Benny Gantz into the fold. There's really no logical reason for him to chase down Gantz at this point.
Okay, Mike Wagenheim, thank you very much.